All right. Well, thank you guys for having me today. My name is Stuart Bourne. I'm the head strength and conditioning coach at the University of St. Thomas. And today I'm going to talk about the role of the strength and conditioning coach and sports medicine team. And so to start with, I'll just let you guys know kind of what we're going to be talking about here. Here's the outline. So I'm going to be talking about college strength and conditioning coach's journey, specifically my journey, and I'm going to maybe talk a little bit about generalities of how most strength and conditioning coaches get to where they get to a college setting. Because my path is a little bit different because I'm also an athletic trainer. I'm going to talk about strength and conditioning coaches' role with injured athletes and how they play a pivotal role in helping that athlete return to play. Talk a little bit about injury prevention, modifications, and then also we're going to talk about some movement screens because that's a pretty popular topic and it's widely utilized, and I've implemented them quite a bit in my previous jobs. And then I'm going to have some videos, hopefully some cool videos for you guys to get to see what we do with some of the St. Thomas athletes and whether working with injured athletes and making modifications with their lifts, and then also what I do with like kind of large group training for speed and agility. All right. So I'm going to start off telling you guys just about myself and how I've gotten to the place I've gotten to. Has anybody ever read this book? It's a great book. I love getting book recommendations from talks that I go to, so I'll have a few recommendations for you guys. So Start With Why by Simon Sinek. So basically the theme of this book is that most people know what they do. They even might know how they do it, but they really don't know why they're doing it, or they don't really think about it very much and have that central role, that core of why am I doing what I'm doing, and how do I get better at that. And so that's what I'm going to start with today. I'll tell you why I do what I do, how I do it, and what it is that I do. All right, so first thing, why? So initially I became an athletic trainer. And the reason I became an athletic trainer is I wanted to help others reach their goals, specifically others who are in a place that they probably didn't expect to find themselves in, being injured, tearing their ACL, not being happy with that situation, and how do we get them back to the person that they were, the athlete that they were, and even better. Okay, so that was really my motivation, and I really enjoyed doing that. Some of my frustrations, though, is that as an athletic trainer, one of our core values is injury prevention, and I felt like I didn't get to do a lot of that as an athletic trainer. I felt like I was always putting out fires, just dealing with all the athletes that when they get injured, then they come in and see me, and I didn't get as much opportunity to do that injury prevention with them. Because a lot of athletes, if they're not hurt, they probably don't want to put in extra time with the athletic trainer, and I totally understand that. So then I decided to, I was always interested in strength and conditioning, and I had already had my certification, and so I really, once I had this opportunity presented to go and be the head strength and conditioning coach at the University of St. Thomas, I really wanted to jump at that because I saw that as an opportunity to have a broader impact with a lot of athletes, because I view strength and conditioning as the ultimate injury prevention, because that's something that they're doing consistently, and they already have that incentive because they want to improve their performance. So that was something that I thought would be a really great opportunity for me, and so that's kind of my why of going from athletic trainer and then converting over to strength and conditioning coach. All right, so how I did that. So I got my Bachelor of Science degree in athletic training and exercise science at MSU Moorhead, or Moorhead State. So I got great education there. I got some great practical experience there as well. I worked with great athletic trainers who have helped me pretty much get every job that I've gotten since graduating from there, including going to grad school. So building those relationships were really important for me, and I got, because of those relationships I built, I was able to get a lot of great experiences. I also got to do a summer internship with the Miami Dolphins as an athletic trainer, so that was a really great opportunity and kind of eye-opening to see what kind of the elite level looks like and how I can still apply that same foundation to whatever setting that I'm in. Doesn't have to necessarily be in the pros, but I can still have that same mindset and apply it to the setting that I'm in. So then, and after undergrad, I passed my DOC exam, and so I became a certified athletic trainer. I knew I wanted to work in college settings, so then I decided to go to grad school, and so I went to the University of Minnesota, and I got a great grad assistant experience, and that was like the #1 thing. So I was a graduate assistant with track and field, cross country, and tennis. And I also worked with the football team in the summer in between those 2 years. So that was a great experience that I had. That really kind of opened me up to strength and conditioning, because track and field at its purest form is applying strength and conditioning principles, speed, power, strength. And so I worked with a great strength and conditioning coach there with our women's track and field team. And so that kind of opened my eyes and got me really interested in strength and conditioning. So then I wanted to make sure that that was something that I went and got certified in whenever I was done there. And also I built a lot of great relationships there that have also helped me along the way. And those are relationships, those are great with fellow athletic trainers and teachers that I can go back to and talk to and kind of bounce ideas off of and just be a mentor to me, because I think that's really important to have somebody that's a mentor to you that can help you grow and learn. Okay. So then, once I graduated from University of Minnesota, then I ended up getting a job at Pcl Orthopedics. I really wanted to be in the college setting, but I was married and my wife had a great job here, and I was kind of tethered to being here, and so I didn't want to be looking all over the place. And so the best job that for me at that time was at the Blake School. I became their head athletic trainer. And then I also supported them in strength and conditioning. They had a strength and conditioning coach there, but he was transitioning on his way out, so I was able to help out with our hockey team and our lacrosse team and some of their off-season training. So it was like my first chance to really apply some of that knowledge practically in the strength and conditioning setting. And it was a great opportunity, and it was a great experience. I really enjoyed working there. I worked there for 2 years, and I really enjoyed that time there. But I knew I wanted to get back into a college setting. And actually, the way that happened, one of my former teachers at Moorhead ended up calling me up and saying, hey, there's a position open at Augsburg College. I know you want to be back in the college setting. I recommended you to them. And so then that was I'm very grateful for that. So I ended up getting a role as assistant athletic trainer with Augsburg College. So I worked with men's and women's soccer, men's and women's basketball, track and field, and lacrosse while I was there. That was a great opportunity. That was a great experience. I really got to be more hands-on in that situation, working with athletes, because in a high school setting, you kind of are at the whim of the parents, they're minors that you're working with. So if they tear their ACL, you just tell their parents, like, here's who I recommend, do whatever is going to work for you guys. In the college setting, I have much more control over that and much more guidance for that athlete. So if they tear their ACL, we're seeing our team doctor. They're usually going to be getting their surgery with the team doctor unless they have some other connection, and that's fine. But then I get to see and work with them every day in a much more flexible environment, and I can see them from right from the start of that injury all the way until they return to play, and I can help guide them if they need to see physical therapist, if they need to see the chiropractor, if they need to see a sports psychologist, and we'll get more into those topics in a little bit here. So I really enjoyed that aspect and that autonomy as well. And while I've been at Twin Cities Orthopedics, I also worked in the PT clinic, so I helped with a total joint program. After they were done with their physical therapy, they would get to come and see me, so if they had a total knee done, they would get a PT, and then the PTs would refer them to me, and so then I would help get them kind of fully recovered back into like functional activities. If it was somebody that wanted to get back to golfing or somebody that just wanted to get back to gardening, those kind of things. So I would help them kind of get back to their functional place where they could be active in their former lives before their joint replacement. So that was really interesting. I learned a lot about kind of rehab, regressions and progressions at a very low level, but still how to get them functional. So then also, this is another book recommendation. I don't know if anybody's ever read this book, but this is a great book as well. This really helped me when I was done with grad school. I read this book, and it really helped open up my eyes to the fact that I can always be learning and growing. Like, just because I have my degree and I have my certification doesn't mean that I'm done, and doesn't mean that the continuing ed that I do is just something I have to do that's required by my board. It really opened my eyes to show that I can grow as a person, but also as a professional. And so basically the premise of this book is there's two mindsets. There's a growth mindset and a fixed mindset. And a growth mindset is always taking on opportunities, and that's just it. They don't look at it as necessarily a challenge or something that is a negative. They view it as a positive. So even if it's something that they can potentially fail at, they're going to embrace it and they want to go for it because they see that as a learning opportunity, regardless if they win or lose or fail or succeed. And they don't look at it as a reflection on them and their person or their character as a person. Whereas a fixed mindset, they don't necessarily want to go for those things. They don't want to push themselves because if they fail, then that's a reflection on them as a person. And so that whole premise really helped open up my eyes to push myself and not be afraid to challenge myself with new opportunities, which is why I'm the head strength and conditioning coach at St. Thomas now. And essentially the fixed mindset, they really just tie up their ego into what they're doing. And so, and to me, that just doesn't make sense. If I fail at something, I shouldn't take that as a failure for myself as a person. That just means I just need to apply myself and get better in that scenario. So that's, I think, the last book recommendation I have for you guys.
That's great.
All right. So more how I did this. So going back to how did I then, after I was done with grad school, how did I get to the place that I got to? So looking at continuing education, right? There's lots of different paths and courses you can take. And so I was kind of overwhelmed when I started looking at like, what should I do? What should I go for? And I really had a tough time trying to figure that out. And so it was really overwhelming for me. But I knew that I wanted to get my CSCS, so I just kind of started with there and worked off of that. I also attended FMS certification courses. I got certified in corrective exercise specialist from NASM. So I was looking at all these things, and it's important, these certifications are important, but I also realized that that's not everything. I just don't need a bunch of letters after my name. I also need to make sure that I can be a good practitioner and combine all these things to just provide the best service that I can to my athletes. But that was huge for whenever I was able to pass the CSCS exam. That was a big step for me. I was really excited. But I also realized there was still a lot more for me to learn. Okay. And so most strength and conditioning coaches, to get to a college setting, a lot of them will, they go to they go to undergrad, and they may not even have a degree in exercise science or a kinesiology or that background. A lot of them I know they've had their degrees were in business or something just random, but then they got into it and decided like, oh, this is something I really want to do. And as long as you have your an undergrad degree and your first aid and CPR certified, you're eligible to take that exam. You just have to study and apply yourself, and you can take that exam. Once you pass it, that's kind of the gold standard for college settings. There's also another certification that you can take as well. But most of them, they have very diverse backgrounds. And then once they get that certification, for a lot of them, they have to put in a lot of time, basically volunteering. They might call it an internship. They might, call it like a part-time job. But for a lot of them, they have to just volunteer their time to get the experience that they want, because there's not a lot of these positions available, and there's a lot of guys that want those positions. So luckily for me, with my background, I didn't have to do that because of my athletic training background, and I started to kind of transition over into strength and conditioning whenever I had that opportunity. So I didn't have to take that route, but that's the more traditional route for a lot of strength coaches. If they know that that's what they want to do, they have to put in the time, they have to volunteer a lot of time. And they'll go to grad school too, but a lot of times in grad school they don't. There's only so many of those graduate assistant positions for them to get paid while they work with the athletes. So a lot of times they end up having to volunteer their time there as well if they want to get that experience. So NCAA requirements, this is something that's been relatively new in the past. Strength coaches, they didn't really regulate them in any way. Like, obviously whenever you're a medical professional, you have to be regulated by your board, you have to be certified, you have to have continuing education. And they didn't even have requirements that a strength coach had to be certified in college settings. So now they have these certifications in place, or these requirements in place for them, that they must be certified, that they must have their first aid CPR AEDs card. And most schools would require this anyways, it just wasn't mandated by the NCAA. So I don't want to give the impression that they just had underqualified people working. They just didn't really have this regulated through the NCAA. And so these are the two most common ones. These are kind of the gold standards, so the NSCA or the Collegiate Strength and Conditioning Coaches Association. So both of those are accredited. Either path is fine to take if you wanted to be in that setting, in the collegiate setting. And this is when the NCAA put these guidelines in place, was August 1st, 2015, so it is definitely very new. So if schools didn't have this in place, then they kind of had to scramble to make sure that they got these certifications in place for their employees. And a lot of times they give them like a year window. If you're not certified and they did hire you, well, then you get like a year to make sure that you can pass that. So, all right, now to the what. So what I'm doing is I'm trying to apply the best evidence that I've been exposed to that is applicable to my environment. I think that's super important because there's tons of research out there on training that is really great, but it's great maybe in that sterile environment in a lab, and it's maybe not going to be great in my Division III setting when there's one of me and there's 700 athletes that I'm working with. So that's really important that you look at this research and figure out how can I take the most important aspects of it and still apply it to the athletes that I'm working with. And the goal then is to help those athletes perform at their highest level. And so we do that with strength, speed, power, all those things that are listed there. But the most important thing that I've come to find is the relationships. If I don't have a good relationship with my athletes, with my coaches, with my administration, with the athletic trainers, the people that I work with on a daily basis, then I can have the best programs, I can have the best equipment, but it's probably not going to be very effective because people aren't going to be wanting to come in and work with me. So I really make sure that that's the number one thing for me is to make sure I have great relationships with my athletes, with my coaches. And what that means is I can't just hang out in the weight room all day and expect people to just come to me. I've got to go to practices and make myself visible and seen and show the athletes that I care about you beyond what you do in the weight room with me, okay? So that means I go out to football practice when I can, but that also means I'm trying to go to soccer practice, I try and go to basketball practice. I'll try and take teams if they want through their warm-ups initially just to show them this is what we should be doing, this is how we should be doing it, and then I go and check and see, are you still doing that? Do I need to give you any tweaks? Do I need to follow up with that? And then I go in the athletic training room and just see what athletes are in there, who's injured, what's going on with them, and then I'll make sure that I'm talking to them, asking them how they're doing, are they progressing, are they getting better, showing them that I care about them beyond how much they can bench or squat. That's super important to these athletes. All right, so now we'll get into like the injured athlete journey, right? So from start to kind of finish, and this is kind of individual based for the athlete and for the environment that we're working in. And I'll tell you a little bit maybe kind of from the athletic trainer side of things when I was at Augsburg, kind of how it worked, and then now in my new role at St. Thomas, how I function as well. So when an athlete gets injured, the first person that they're probably going to see is the athletic trainer. So the scenario, say they sprain their ankle out at soccer practice, athletic trainer's right there for them. They probably got to see it or were close by, so then they're right on the scene whenever that happens, right? So they're going to do that initial evaluation and decide what's the best course of action for that athlete. Is there a suspected fracture? Do they need to go get imaging? Do they just need a minute and it was just kind of a quick scare and they're good to go back out on the field? But they're going to do that initial evaluation and make sure that they figure out what's the best course of action. So that treatment, so it could be just taping them up to get them back out there. It could be getting them in the game ready, and so we get some compression and elevation on that, giving them a walking boot, crutches if they need it, and then certainly rehab exercises. That's the most important thing that I think that we can provide. And so that may be where it ends. That may be as far as that injured athlete journey goes. And in a lot of cases, that is as far as it goes whenever it's something like that. But there's plenty of other cases then where it becomes, is a referral necessary? If we need to get images, then we need to see our team physician. If those images come back and they're clean and there's no fracture, but they're still dealing with a lot of swelling and other pain symptoms, range of motion, those kind of things, well then we can refer them to a lot of different people, right? So they can be seeing a physical therapist, they can see a chiropractor. There's a lot of different avenues that this injury can go. Okay, and when we do that, then it's going to be a further evaluation by that clinician to see, make sure we're covering all our bases. Did the athletic trainer miss something initially, or has it evolved and changed into something that it wasn't really presenting initially for that athletic trainer? So then imaging, X-rays, MRIs, CT scans, those kind of things will be important in dictating that further treatment by that clinician, whatever they decide that they're going to do. And then that's always in conjunction with the athletic trainer and the athlete. The athletic trainer is kind of that that key point person that needs to know what's going on with this athlete from start to finish, because they're kind of the gatekeeper. If the athlete goes kind of outside of like say St. Thomas's care providers and they go to their friend or something like that, that's fine. But what ends up happening is there can be a communication breakdown and a lapse. And so then when that athlete comes back and says, well, I'm ready to go now, and they haven't seen him for maybe a few days, they're like, well, I don't know what you've been doing. We need to get documentation. We have to make sure that we're documenting what you've done with whoever you've seen. And then I need to put you through, a kind of your paces of return to play progression to make sure that I'm comfortable with you going back. Because if I just take your word for it, you go back and you get hurt, that's on me, right? So it's really best that, and I found this out actually working at the high school, that was kind of my decision to want to go back to college, because I just didn't have that control. So I just didn't know sometimes what my athlete was doing and who they were seeing and what their qualifications were. So that made it very difficult for me sometimes to make those judgment calls of like, can you go back and you want to try and play today? How do I make that call? And then the strength and conditioning sport coaches, we're kind of in the same realm, the way I view it, as far as where we fall within this, because we're not treating that athlete. We're not medical providers in our roles as a strength and conditioning coach and a sport coach. But we're still pivotal people in this athlete's journey, right? Because we kind of overlook it and think like, well, we're just going to do all this treatment and try and get this athlete back. And then once they're back, they're just full go with that sport coach and they can just do whatever they want with them. And that's really a disservice to the athlete. We need to make sure that we're communicating and that everybody in this that's listed on this slide is communicating, and that the coaches understand what the athlete can do and what they can't do and how we're going to progress them back into practice and back into a game situation. If they only miss a couple days, that's probably not as pivotal or as important. They're able to get back probably a little bit quicker with a smoother transition. But if it's an ACL and they missed the entire year, we're probably not going to just have them ready to practice on day one full go as everybody else. We have to make sure that we're communicating and that we're modifying things as we go. And so an example of that for, say, football players, you're going to do warm-ups, you can do individual drills, but as soon as there's contacts that's involved, that's when you're going to come out and we'll do extra conditioning with you on the side. You don't just come and sit out for the rest of practice and not do anything. We're still working and trying to get you better and get you in shape and ready to come back to play. And really, it's not just about that ACL, it's about conditioning overall for that entire body, right? So we don't suffer a subsequent injury to a different area of the body. So that's super important that we're all communicating on a daily basis so we know, okay, this is the expectations, this is what we're looking for, and this is how we're going to do it. Okay? And then I just threw family underneath there, communication and modification, because sometimes that's an important factor, sometimes it's not at the college level. Sometimes it can be a really good thing if it's an injury like an ACL and they're going to be out for a long time. Sometimes the family's great because that's support for that athlete. And sometimes it can be a negative. Sometimes it can be a stressor on that athlete. So that's still something you just kind of have to have in the back of your mind, if the family, how involved the family's going to be in that situation. Okay? So return to play. There's many variables that are involved with that. So let's look at that. So severity of the injury, that's like one of the biggest things, is how bad is this injury and how much time do we expect you to miss and how much time did you miss before we get you back to return to play. So, and then also we want to really look at what's the requirements of your sport and your position, right? If we have a swimmer that sprained their ankle, walking around or, slipped on the ice or something like that, their ankle's important in that sport, but it's probably not as important as it would be for a soccer player. If a soccer player sprains their ankle, that's going to be a little bit more challenging in getting them back to return to play, because they've got to have their foot on the ball. That contact, that ball, that external force that's creating on that foot and ankle makes it really difficult sometimes. Versus the swimmers, being in the water, sometimes that's probably going to be better for them. They're not going to be weight bearing with that, so it may not affect them nearly as much. So that's something that we really have to look at and decide how are we going to manage this. Another example is in football. If you're, say, a linebacker and you fracture your hand or your finger and you have to put a cast on, you can still play with that. That's fine. We can cast you up and we'll wrap it up and you can still play. No big deal there. But if you're a wide receiver or running back or quarterback, you're not going to be able to play. So it really depends on your position as well. And so that's something that the athletic trainer and the sport coach needs to talk about and needs to be on the same page with. okay? And then just their history of injuries as well. Have they suffered a lot of injuries, lower extremity injuries after they tore their ACL on top of that? So we have to look at all those things and make sure we're not ignoring maybe some of these peripheral injuries that they had suffered initially and just focus on this one big injury. We need to make sure we're taking into account all the history that they've gone through. And so during that whole process, the athletic trainer and team physician are really the drivers of that, and they're crucial for that, and they're going to be the ones that kind of dictate to the strength coach, to the sport coach, what's going on. It is a collaborative effort, but we need to make sure that we know our roles and that we're making sure that we don't go outside of those roles. Okay. So yeah, we're wanting to collaborate to ensure the safest and quickest possible return. And so that's huge. I found as an athletic trainer sometimes working with sport coaches that to remind them, like, I want them to get back as quick as possible too. Like, I know you want them back, today. I want them to be back as quick as possible too. But we have to make sure we're doing it safely. If we're being negligent, we just let them go back, then they're going to suffer a greater injury, and then they're going to miss even more time. So I always try and make sure that they understood we're all on the same team here. We're trying to get this athlete back, but we just have to make sure we have different roles and how we're going to do that. And so looking at 2 ways to do that. So if an athlete has missed a lot of time and they haven't been able to lift because of their injury, or it's been really modified lifting. So that's one way, that's one mode of looking at, okay, how did they respond to this lift? We're going to allow them to, or modify a few things, but we're really going to push them in the weight room a little bit just to see how they respond. And I'll talk a little bit about weight room modifications here in a little bit. But that's a great place to look at, just kind of a practice run to see, we really pushed you in the weight room. How did you respond? Things are looking good. We didn't get any adverse symptoms. And then the next step would be doing some speed and agility type drills at practice, or just the strength coach and the athletic trainer going out on their own with that athlete out on the field or on the court to look at some speed and agility type movements and just see what do they look like. This is just kind of that eye test. Are they limping? Are they favoring that side? And really making sure that you're testing them in functional ways for what their position is going to require of them. If they're a defensive back, can they get down, can they get low, and can they open up their hips and turn into a sprint? Can they make those transitions? So those are important things you need to be thinking about whenever we're trying to return them to a full practice or even a modified practice. So I found this little graphic, and I thought it was nice. It kind of shows the different roles at the different timelines and that physicians play, physical therapists, an athletic trainer, all the way to a skill coach or a sport coach. So this is a nice little graphic. It's really clean and it looks really nice. There's a little bit of overlap, but we have our defined lines and kind of our defined headers here, what they do, evaluation, rehab, performance, those kind of things. So I think this is nice, but this isn't always reality of what the athlete deals with, okay? And you notice there's psychology under all those individuals, because I think that's really important to note that what's going on with the athlete. Are they feeling comfortable with the way things have progressed? Do they feel comfortable with their injury? Do they feel comfortable with their conditioning to be, and do they feel comfortable with their skills to be able to return to play? So I think that's always super important, and I appreciate that they put that under each one. That doesn't mean that we are practicing psychology with them, but we just need to be aware of that with them and aware of that communication and how we communicate with them is going to be huge for their psychology. Okay, but like I said, this isn't always going to be the way it plays out, because this is kind of nice and neat. If every injury progressed the way we hoped it would in a textbook way, then yeah, this will probably work. But most injuries, I stole this off of Twitter, most injuries are like the one on the right, okay? Most of them don't just progress and just keep on getting better, especially if it's a long-term injury. There's gonna be setbacks, there's gonna be ups and downs to it, and so I think it's important that we recognize that and that we always have a plan B to what we're trying to do, and that we brace the athlete for that, let them know this isn't what we're always going to see, we're not always going to just get better and better. And when I tell athletes as a strength coach and as an athletic trainer, that you need to be looking at the bigger picture. If you're missing months, you need to look at, rather than day to day and get caught up in those swings of I'm better, I'm worse, I'm better, I'm worse, you need to make sure that you're looking at the big picture week to week, month to month. And if they do that, they'll usually say, oh yeah, you're right, I am making progress, I am getting better. It's just not as fast as what they want and obviously what we want as well. Okay, so I kind of made up my own little graph, and it's obviously not nearly as pretty, and but that's kind of the reality of it. The athlete's at the center, and then we have all these other care providers and people that are involved in that athlete's life. And so this is really messy at times, and at times almost all of these people are involved in one way, in one form or another, with that athlete. And so I think this is a more accurate representation. Rather than focusing on timelines, we just need to focus on that individual athlete and how they're progressing. And so we all play important roles, and we may play them at the same time or at different times, but it's important that we realize we have roles and we need to have communication. And there may be blurring of lines at times, but we can't be stepping way outside of our bounds with that athlete. And so at the University of St. Thomas, that means that the athletic trainer and team physician are the ones that are making that return to play decision. Sometimes when an athlete goes and sees their own physical therapist or their own doctor, a family friend, they end up getting information that maybe isn't accurate because those people don't necessarily have the whole picture of what's required of that athlete and the history of that athlete and what's the situation on the team. And so sometimes they'll come back saying, well, I was told I can't play anymore, or I need to have surgery or something like that. And so that can make things difficult whenever we have members of this team that kind of step maybe a little too far outside of their bounds and don't understand that it's really driven by the athletic trainer and by that team physician. That doesn't mean they're more important than anybody else on this list, but that's their role in this situation. And I think it's really important that we look at that other at the bottom there. The other for me, it can be a lot of things, but that's family members, that's friends, that's teammates, that's significant others. It can be a lot of different things on there. That can be school, the stress of school. So that other can be really important and have a greater impact on that athlete than anybody else on this list. Okay, and by that, an example of that is their friend tells them like, well, I separated my shoulder once and then I couldn't play for 6 months or something like that. So they put this seed in that athlete's mind of, well, that happened to them, so then that's the way it's going to be for me. And so sometimes we have to be aware of what else is going on in that athlete's life as far as how we're going to treat them. And that's why we need to be really aware of the communication and the things we're saying to that athlete. All right. So now for injury prevention. So this could be general, this could be sports specific. This is, as far as for my point of view as a strength coach, we can talk about specific exercises, and then we'll talk about this concept of just, as injury prevention, just good training. Is that just thoughtful training, is the way I like to put it. Okay, so this is where I have some research to cite to you guys a little bit. Hopefully it's not too boring here, but basically we're looking at warm-ups right now. And so FIFA 11 Plus, that's a pretty popular standard warm-up for soccer players. And I kind of like it whenever the title of the research article tells you the outcome of what happened during that research, because they found that as long as players adhered to this warm-up, they had significant improvements in their balance and injury prevention. Okay, there's been a ton of research on FIFA 11 Plus, mostly with soccer players, but I think it's pretty applicable to a lot of other sports. Here we go. So this research was done by Holly Silver. She's a PT and she works with Dr. Mandelbaum. They're kind of been the big drivers of this FIFA 11 Plus injury prevention program, and they've done a ton of research on it. I got to see them both speak last year here in the Twin Cities, and essentially what they found is that just doing a warm-up, and during their presentation they talked about it doesn't have to be the exact FIFA 11 Plus. It can just be a good warm-up that covers mobility, strength, agility, speed, and plyometrics. As long as you're covering those bases, then you're probably going to see an injury reduction if you haven't been doing anything like that before. And you don't even have to do it necessarily every day. In our setting, we definitely do it every day before practices, but they found through their research, if you're just doing it 4 times a week, that is like the minimum that you need to do to get these results. So 4 times a week, if you're doing some sort of a dynamic warm-up that includes strength, balance, jumping, stretching, flexibility, that you're going to see these benefits. And so it really just needs to be applicable to your athletes. Soccer, they always do Russian hamstrings, so they want to make sure that they're strengthening those hamstrings because they get a lot of hamstring pulls. Maybe you don't necessarily need to do that for other sports, like maybe, say, volleyball. They're probably not getting a ton of hamstring pulls because they're not sprinting, but you want to make sure that you're focusing on really quick change of direction and balance and jumping with volleyball. So I think this just illustrates that making sure you do a good warm-up is important for injury prevention with your teams, and it's really about the accumulation of it. So like I said, if you're doing it 4 times a week, that's great. If you didn't do the whole warm-up one day, but you've been doing it for the last month, probably not going to make a huge difference in the grand scheme of things, but it's an accumulation. You want to be consistent with it. All right, so talking a little bit about specific in general, and this is more in regards to actually pain, but I think it can definitely relate to what I'm doing with athletes as well. So this research just looked at the differences between trying to do targeted functional exercises, like say core stability exercises for somebody with low back pain, versus just general exercise. So just doing like just doing regular, some cardio, like elliptical, that kind of thing. And what they found was that there was no clinical difference or significance between the two. And that, I still take that with a grain of salt too, because we still got to make sure that we're prepping our athletes for the specific demands of their sport, but also realize that there's no magic exercises that are going to fix certain ailments or issues, that it's really just about making sure that we're getting them to move in the ways that their body's allowing them to at that moment, and then we try and progress them. I'll talk more about injury modifications here in a second and how I'm trying to do that, but I think that's a really important key for athletes that are having pain, that we don't just force them to do something because that's what I think is going to be best, because that's the magic exercise for them. Let's focus on what they can do and then try and progress from there. All right, this is also from a book. I'm not recommending this book, I'm just trying to give it credit. This is a book by Frans Bosch. He's a Dutch coach and researcher. He's definitely got some different ideas on training and training theories. I really like this graphic though, because I think it's a nice illustration of where are we on this continuum of being very, very specific with our exercises, or just being more general and being able to overload on these exercises. So as a strength coach, this resonates with me because in the weight room, we're not probably being super specific to say a cross-country runner in what they're doing, right? When they're out running, that's as specific as they can get. When they're in the weight room, that's probably about as far away from specific as they get. But I think both are important and both are key, but it's how we balance and manage those things. So if we're, as a cross-country runner, if you're always in the weight room and you're not running, you're probably going to be strong, but you're probably not going to be a very good cross-country runner. But if you're always out running and you're never in the weight room, you're probably, you may be good for a little while, but your body's probably going to start breaking down, and your performance is probably going to eventually start to suffer from that kind of specialization, right? So I think it's important that we look at that continuum and decide, where are we and where do we want to be at any given time of the year, right? So in our preseason, we're probably going to be more on that overload variation side of things, because we want to have variety and we want to just build up a nice base. And then as we get closer to their season, we focus less on the weight room and we focus more on your actual sport. And so I look at this as another analogy for this is, if you're a basketball player and all you do is shoot corner three-pointers all day and that's all you practice on, you're going to be really good at that, but you're not going to be really good at dribbling, passing, playing defense, rebounding, running up and down the court. So you're missing out on a lot of different things if you just specialize in one specific thing within your sport. So I think that's really a critical thing to remember here whenever we're working with athletes. All right, so a little bit more research here on training, so eccentric training. So this picture right here is a flywheel. We don't have this at St. Thomas. These are expensive pieces of equipment. It's not necessarily very practical to utilize in my setting. And so that kind of goes back to, let's look at research, look what they found, and see how I can apply it to my environment. Okay, so they looked at 10 weeks of in-season eccentric overload training, and they found some pretty good results. So this is that flywheel machine. I have a video on the next slide, which I'll show you guys that in action, actually. So it's an eccentric-based program, so it's leading to a reduction in muscle injuries. So I think that's really important to look at. So the way I applied this, I don't have a flywheel, but the way I applied this, we use tempos on our lifts. So if we're squatting, we're going to use a tempo with that, and maybe we're not being very heavy with that squat, but we're going to say do a back squat, and our tempo is going to be a 3-1-1 tempo, meaning 3 seconds lowering on the way down, so you're controlling that eccentric motion of that. 1 second pause, and then 1 second back up for an explosion in that concentric motion and movement, okay? So that's how I try and apply it. That's also known as triphasic training. I don't utilize that as my catch-all for all training, but I utilize pieces of that, and I think the eccentric component of that is very important. So I really just stress that, and that's something that we know as clinicians through rehab is a really important factor in return to play and in preventing injuries. So here's the video of this. So there's a few different machines in here with this flywheel. So this wheel is spinning. There's a kind of like a bungee that's recoiling and uncoiling back and forth. And so they have to use that inertial force is being applied, and they have to control that down in different ways here. So. And so essentially it's just applying more force on that lowering phase, because we obviously can have more force placed upon us in that eccentric pattern. And the first two, the squat and the hamstring curl, is what they did in that study. I don't believe they did the leg press portion of that. All right, here's another one that looked at eccentric training. And so this just looked at performance versus injury prevention, and it was a systematic review to look at that. And they found that eccentric loads, that's not constrained by concentric strength. So basically what that means is that we're doing maybe more than what we can concentrically do. And so ways that we can do that, but I haven't applied with my athletes, is you can overload that bar, right, from beyond what their max squat is. So say their max squat is 300 pounds. Well, we can put 320 pounds on there, set up safety bars on either side, and just have them lowering that bar down to it. They're not going to push back up, and then you can empty that bar and get it back up. So that's one way of looking at how to do that. But really, I think the most important thing is that we realize that eccentric training is important, that we shouldn't be rushing through that. So that's something I'm always preaching to my athletes. If they're trying to rush through something, usually speed in the weight room a lot of times can be, and with rehab, is a compensation because it's difficult. They're not able to do it, so they're just trying to rush through it. And so I always preach to them, let's make sure we're taking our time with it if that exercise calls for it. And if we need to take rest in between, just because it says we're doing 3 by 8 and you can only do 4 today, that's fine. It's a number on the sheet. We need to make sure it's as individualized to you as possible, and we work up to that. All right, and then coordination. That's one thing I think it gets overlooked by just practitioners in general, athletic trainers, strength coaches. I think this is a super important thing to look at. And coordination just meaning how do they control their body? They may have great strength, they may have great speed, but do they have control over both of those things? Can they decelerate? Can they balance on one leg? Are they able to land appropriately without valgus caving, those kind of things? So we really need to make sure that they have control and coordination of these movements, and I think that gets overlooked. And this study was really interesting. So it's comparing their strength and quote unquote functional tests with coordination tests. And so this isn't the actual graph from the study, but this I just had to replicate it because I couldn't copy and paste it. But basically what they had to do was a single leg press, and they were at between 90 degrees and full extension. And so they had to follow this graph back and forth on a computer screen. So as the dot moved on that computer screen, they had to follow it and be extending and flexing their knee with a given amount of weight. And they found that the affected side didn't really improve, even though strength had improved and their functional hopping tests had improved, that this didn't improve. So that's looking a little bit at just that eye coordination and that reaction. Can they follow this line? How much control do they have over that strength? So I think that's important to look at. And so it's important to make sure that when we do that progression, we're making sure that we progress and look at speed, agility, and that eye test of how are they cutting, how are they moving, do they have a limp, do they have a delay, do they have a lag of some kind, comparing bilaterally. Okay, and then I really appreciate this picture. This is also something I stole off of Twitter. This is a great representation of what I do in training with athletes. So box jumps are really cool to do, and the higher the box is, the cooler it is, the better it is, right? And I think this is a great representation of, not really, he's jumping up, he's getting up higher in this box, but where are his hips going? Are his hips getting any higher? Doesn't really look like it from this picture. And so is he really getting more benefit out of that box jump on the right compared to the left? Maybe. Maybe on the right, he's exerting more force to get there, but at what cost, right? So maybe on the right, that's something we can do every once in a while, but that shouldn't be a regular part of our training probably, because I like the position that he's in on the left a whole lot better. So that the one on the left is probably one we want to focus on for the majority of the time, but maybe every once in a while we can throw in this higher box in there to really try and see if we can challenge him with that mental, can I get up there, right? And then also just giving his all for it. So he's probably going to try more for that box on the right, but we're still getting the same result as far as hip projection goes for both of these boxes. So I think this is really a key thing to remember in our training, and I think it applies more than to just box jumps. Let's make sure that we're using correct form, correct technique to get what we want out of it. And if that means we're benching only, 200 pounds instead of 225, that's fine. I don't think that's going to matter a whole lot whenever you're out on the field. Nobody really cares if you bench 220 or 225 or 250 really. It's how can you apply those things in an efficient manner. So, injury modification. So, I'll try and speed through these real quick. I didn't realize the time here, but when I'm dealing with somebody who says low back pain and they say, I can't squat, the doctor told me I shouldn't squat, how do I address this, right? Well, usually they mean you shouldn't back squat. So say if they have like a disc issue or something like that usually means they don't want to be loading the spine, right? Well, there's a lot of variations that we can do to still get the result that we're looking for out of this. So these are a lot of different variations of a squat, and we can do it weighted, unweighted. So I think that these are examples of what I'm doing with my athletes whenever they tell me I have back issues and I'm not supposed to squat. We're looking at shoulder pain. Say they have a left AC sprain and they're told they can't do anything overhead. How do I address that? Well, single arm, right? That's pretty easy. If we're doing pull-ups and they can't do a pull-up, but maybe they can do an inverted row on that picture on the bottom right there. Okay. I have quite a few slides on movement screens, so I'm going to speed through them, but why are we doing them? How are we going to do it? And what are we going to do them with them after we're all done, right? So that's a huge thing that sometimes we do them, and I have experienced this. We do them, and then we just file them away, and we don't really do anything with that information with those athletes. And it takes a lot of work when we're doing large group movement screens, okay? And so I'm probably going to come across as maybe bashing functional movement screens, and that's not the case. I'm certified in it, I'm glad I'm certified in it, but I think it's really important that you understand the why, the how, and the what behind why you're doing it. And those, if you don't know those things, you probably shouldn't be doing it, okay? So there's some research here, I'm gonna kind of speed through it here. And it's just kind of looking at, is the functional movement screen kind of the be-all, end-all? So it can definitely, some of these studies show that it can accurately identify injury risk, but there's also kind of variations on that, okay? So this is an interesting study here that showed that, does everybody know a functional movement screen, first of all? Familiar with it? Okay. So looking at the lunge, right, they found there was no association between the total score and the injury, but they found that if you scored a 2 on a lunge, you were probably less likely to get injured than if you scored a 3 after the fact. Which, for me, the whole thing with functional movement screens is that that's a snapshot in that day and that moment for that athlete. That's really important that we look at it with a grain of salt that way. We can't just take it as that's that athlete and that's that athlete all the time. That's that athlete in that setting and in that particular day in that situation. So I think that's what's really important about that. It's great to do, and I think it can be very helpful, but we can't just put all our eggs in one basket with it. Okay, let's see. So this was a great one looking at it. It was a great injury predictor when they scored at 14 or below, but combining that with their past injury history, so that further looking at the whole person, the whole athlete here, we're not just looking at just that functional movement screen. So making sure that you're doing a thorough history, I think, is super important as well. And then this is this is I think a really good one. So they did this research. Dr. Stuart McGill, he's out of Canada. He's a good back guy. They did this research, and their conclusion was that the functional movement screen needed to be amended before using it beyond appraising, moving freely, symmetrically, and without pain. That's all it can do. Well, I'd argue that's what the creators made it for, was to just judge, can you move freely, symmetrically, and without pain? They're not looking at this as segmented measurements of spine mobility and knee mobility. They're looking at this as more of a total body, kind of a shotgun approach. So I think some people have taken it to be like something that it's really not. And I have some videos. I don't know if we have time for that, to show some videos. Or
maybe some Q&A. I'm not sure if we're going to have a class in here at 8. I just checked the schedule. I think we're okay. I think some students might have a class at 8.
Okay.
But maybe some Q&A then, and then if they could stay for videos.
Sure.
Yeah. I'll start off with the question.
Yeah.
So you mentioned NCAA is now, for collegiate level, strength coaches are requiring a minimum competency certification. I think that's fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned 2 of them, SCA and the collegiate one. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Are there other associations as well that are approved?
You know, I think there are, but those are the 2 gold standards.
Okay.
I'm not sure if they count like the personal training certifications, like through ACE or NASM. I'm not sure. It usually needs to have a continuing education component to it. If you're going to be certified, you have to have that continuing education component to keep that certification.
I'd be surprised if ACSM at some level isn't included in there.
Yeah,
ACE, I can understand
they
that.
might, yeah.
And then the second question about high school, where do you see that same policy maybe fitting into high school at some point?
Yeah, I think that's tough just because not every high school has a strength coach
Yeah.
that's on staff, and a lot of times it ends up just being the football coach that runs it for all the teams, or it's just done by individual coaches, or it's just a PE teacher that is kind of supervising it, that kind of thing. So I think that's going to probably be a little bit tougher for them to put those kind of regulations.
Even if it's the football coach, though, there could be some minimum competency requirements, right?
Yeah.
CSCS.
And most of the time, the minimum for that is that you are CPR first aid AED certified.
Okay.
And so I think that's kind of the main key for them, is that litigation, that, making sure that we're being safe
Cool.
in those settings. Anybody else? Yes?
With Eccentric training, do you implement that throughout the entire year for a specific program, or do you do that in like specific phases?
It's a little bit of both, because we're always working eccentrically whatever we're doing, right? But as far as the emphasis goes, and to what you're asking, yeah, I think it's important to cycle that in and out. We don't need to be doing that all the time. I don't focus on that initially during their general prep phase and that early preseason. As we get closer to it, then we'll put a little bit more on that in there. But then once we get right before the season, then we're really focusing on concentric and on power, right? And then in the off season, once the season's done into the off season, that's another time where I can focus on that and get that new program back in there. Yep.
Would you mind repeating all your book recommendations?
Oh, sure, yeah. So Start With Why by Simon Sinek, that's a great one. And then Mindset by Carol Dweck. Yeah, so those 2. The other book I mentioned is, I think it's Strength and Coordination by Franz Bosch, is the guy who wrote that. But that's a pretty dense, in-depth strength and conditioning book. So unless you're really into strength and conditioning, I wouldn't necessarily go that route. But Start With Why and Mindset, those are great books that I would recommend highly. Yes?
With all the sports that you worked with, have you worked with chiropractors?
Yes, so I've worked with chiropractors, starting as a student at Morehead State. I got a great opportunity there actually to work with a chiropractor physical therapist. And so that was a really unique opportunity to go and shadow him in clinic. And then also at the University of Minnesota, they would usually have, they had a chiropractor that would come and work there with us as well. And it's usually like a weekly, they come in and anywhere from 15 to 30-minute appointments, kind of depending on the setting. And we also had a chiropractor at Augsburg College as well. We don't currently have one at St. Thomas, but I think that you guys have talked about that a little bit. Any other questions? Yes?
So you mentioned about the FMS and how it should be maybe better utilized.
Mhm.
When we were talking earlier, you described how you did that on the incoming freshmen at St. Thomas for football.
Yep.
So how do you plan to utilize that for injury prevention, or using those scores, as you mentioned, 14
Sure.
or 18 might get more injured than a
Sure. So that actually, I didn't play a role in that process at St. Thomas. I actually played more of a role when I was athletic trainer at Augsburg and implemented it. At St. Thomas, I believe that was their first year doing it, so I think and they just decided to do it with incoming freshmen because they didn't want to have to do 160 of them for everybody on the football team. And I think they looked at that as being an opportunity more for education for those athletes of how we move versus we're taking these scores and we're going to really do a whole lot with them right now. And so that's where we need to look at it in that evolution. And if that's all you're going to do with it, then you really need to make sure you're not putting a ton of resources and emphasis on it. I feel like if it's just going to be more of an education tool for those incoming freshmen, that made me think, well, it doesn't matter how flexible I am, it just matters how strong I am. So I think that's a good time to educate those athletes whenever you're going through that test. But I would, for me personally, when I was at Augsburg and we were implementing it, my last 2 years there, we changed it. I really modified it because I wanted to make it a simple test for the athletes. So we kept an overhead squat and straight leg raise and shoulder mobility. And then we also did single leg squat and a drop box jump because we were looking for that valgus knee for both of those, and then just the control that they had over that. And for me, that was more beneficial because then it's at least specifically looking at, do we have risk of the ACL injury there with adding those 2 additional tests in there. And so then the hard thing is though, is we do these tests, and then if the athlete's not hurt but they have a really bad score, and we say, you need to come in and do extra work with us, they're not going to do it. We've tried a lot of different ways. We've posted things in locker rooms like general, like for everyone to try and do before they go out to practice. We've gotten better at introducing it into like warm-ups. So like we'll try to get it into their sport warm-up or weight room warm-up. That helped a little bit, but it's really hard. The athlete, if they don't have that incentive to do it because they're injured, or if they don't necessarily see that immediacy of it, which not many of them do, then it's really hard to get them to come in and do that. And we even at Augsburg, we even did videos of like the correctives and posted them like online for them to look at too, to do it. And it's just, it's difficult. I haven't found a great way to implement it yet. Any other questions? You guys want to see a few videos?
Yep.
Okay. All right, so first of all, I'll just look at we'll look at form here real quick, what I do with an athlete. So this is an athlete who, he's a track athlete, and he wanted me to watch his cleans, right? And so his clean form really not where it needs to be, okay? And so I think video is a great feedback tool for athletes because then they get to see what do they look like from other angles than just straight on, okay? So this was, that was something that I knew, okay, I can't just give him a couple cues and we're just gonna fix his clean all of a sudden. So then we regress and we look at how we regress that. And for me, Olympic lifts in general are just about triple extension, ankle, knee, and hip, right? So what's another exercise that we can do to achieve that? So doing a jump shrug, right? He's getting triple extension here, whenever he's jumping, and so at the ankle, knee, and hip, right? He's getting that triple extension that we want. So why not start there? We start at the very basic form, so he's going to get some benefit out of it, and then we can work on those progressions with him, okay? And if anybody has any questions on these, just go ahead and throw your hands up in the air. So then also looking at what I do for agility with our athletes. So this is, we have a combo hour, so we have lacrosse, softball, soccer, hockey teams will be up here. So right now they have a defined space, and this is just like PE class for them. We're just shuffling around in space, don't run into each other, we're moving around, right? So that's just kind of an easy warm-up thing, just being aware spatially in our environment. Then we go ahead and add in kind of a fun competitive component to it. They have Actually, this is just them walking, and when I say go, then they have to sprint, and they try not to run into each other, right? So they have to avoid contact with each other, and they're in this defined space, they can't go out of bounds, right? And then it'll transition. When you have the space, take it. So rather than me saying go, you have some people walking, some people running. So, and it's kind of this game of, it turns into this game of chicken, right? Like whenever I go and you're going, like, am I going to take the lead and cut you off, or am I going to stop and let you go by? So there's a little bit of mental component to it as well. And then then it becomes more of a game. So then it's like tag. So we have towels, and if you have a towel, you're in. So then you're shuffling. Right now we're just shuffling around. They're trying to tag people, and if you tag somebody, they're in, right? So it's just a little game of pursuit and trying to get away. So let's see. And then here's kind of the last progression of that. It becomes kind of a flag football game. So they tuck the towels into their sides there. And so then they're running around trying to grab people's towels. If you get yours taken, you got to sprint down to the other end, come back in, grab your towel, you're back in the game. So I think these agility games are really important, because sometimes we view agility as just running around cones and running set patterns, and those are called closed agility drills. And this is more open. You don't know what's going to happen. You don't know what you're doing, right? And then go ahead. We'll take a look at this guy. This guy had Pcl Repair, and in these first two videos, that would be about 5, 6 months ago, I think. So here's him doing squat jumps. And for me, I didn't see anything like that was terrible with it, but you can tell he's been, that he had surgery and he's trying to work through it. Let's see if that can.
Stuart, how long post-surgery?
About 5.
Oh, you said 5 months?
About 5. Yeah. We'll see. Here's him doing skips. We'll see if this one loads up. So really what I'm looking here is that same triple extension, right, with these skips and that knee drive. So he's doing a decent job there, but he still is not getting full extension. Let's look at this one, see if it'll load up again here. Because for this one, he's pretty even on both sides. You'll just have to take my word for it. But what is great, actually, that I wouldn't have expected to see this next video, hopefully this one loads up, whenever he's doing some med ball slams. Well, I'll show you guys this one. We'll also do sled pushes here, and so we're working on.
Sometimes we have internet issues on campus.
Sure.
Is that right?
Let's see what else here. This one's pretty good at the.
It's a flip of a coin sometimes.
Let me see if I can just bring it back up here. Well, shoot, sorry guys, these were kind of some of the more fun videos that I was hoping to be able to show you guys.
I think some of the agility stuff you're doing on the field is very creative. Never thought about just doing some random tag with adult athletes. We take care of a couple of athletic teams here, the Minnesota Vixen and the Freeze, and they're very agile sports, acceleration, deceleration, and we had a lot of ACL injuries last year.
Mm-hmm.
I can see some work like that being very helpful.
Yeah, definitely. I learned that I went to a conference that's called Gain in Houston, Texas, and it was presented by a PE teacher from Michigan. That these were the games that he did with his kids during class, and I thought they were super applicable. That cognitive reaction.
Yeah. That's what it's referred to as, maybe generally, as cognitive reaction training.
Yeah, I mean, really, what there's agility. That's what agility really means. Like doing cone drills and like running patterns, that's referred to as change of direction speed, and that is something that's separate from agility. Agility has a cognitive component, a external stimulus that you're reacting to, and there isn't an agreed upon definition for agility, but that's probably about as good as it gets. There's a whole body change of direction in response to an external stimulus of some kind. So we'll see. Maybe this one will load up. So let's get, this is actually our assistant track coach. He is working on his clean forms, and so I was watching the first two reps that he does, or is kind of his old way of doing it, and then his next two are with my suggestions. So he gets really low and sits back with his back straight up and kind of leans back. And so it's not terrible for him. But then once he kind of implements what we're looking for, he gets a little bit more of his hip hinge in there. He's leaning forward more, so it's just a little bit cleaner there that way. He's not resting that bar on his quads necessarily like he was in the other two. So this is one where I definitely feel comfortable still having him clean, but we don't have to regress him all the way back. Yes.
With like these progression lists with like the Olympic lifts you're doing, do you do that just when people ask you, or do you like bring that into your freshman?
Yeah, so I don't have, and honestly right now, our track team is the only one that I have cleans implemented with. Just because I think it's a very tough technical lift to teach, and I don't have the time to teach it to like 140 football players. So we focus on other lifts. So we do jump shrugs, we do some push jerks, we do a lot of different things that's going to get that lower body explosion, but we're just not necessarily focused on just cleans. Let's see if this loads up now. Something about videos, huh? So here we're just doing some resisted band sprints, so getting them to kind of lean into it and really work on that acceleration. We're really still trying to get that triple extension here, and to then it's kind of like a slingshot whenever they release them to get them out there. Yeah, sorry, I wish these were loaded up for you guys, because I think it'd be some cool stuff. So essentially what I saw in this video with this guy here, we have him do med ball slams, and whenever he's, you'll just have to trust me here, whenever he's slamming the ball down, I didn't expect to see this, I was just having him do this just so he built some upper body power. He was completely shifting and rotating over to that right side and keeping that left leg essentially straight. And he had no idea he was doing this, so he was completely shifting as he was slamming that ball down. And I thought this was a great opportunity to videotape, because if I just talked to him about it, I don't think he would have appreciated it as much as if when he actually got to see it. So unfortunately, I just have to take my word for it, though, since the video's not going to load up for me. So, does anybody have any other questions? All right, thank you guys for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah.